Welcome to The Deep Dive, your shortcut to being well-informed, where we unravel complex topics and deliver the surprising facts that make you say, aha. Today, we're diving into a nutrient that, frankly, is nothing short of a public health superstar from the late 20th century, folic acid. Seriously, this isn't just another item on a supplement label. Its story is a profound testament to how a single nutrient can radically transform lives on a population scale.
It truly is a remarkable achievement in preventive medicine. Really quite something. And what's so fascinating is that while its initial groundbreaking role in preventing severe birth defects is monumental, our scientific understanding of folic acid has continued to evolve. We're now moving beyond simple deficiency prevention to uncover a much more intricate interplay between this vital nutrient and broader neurodevelopmental outcomes. It's a bigger picture.
That really highlights the complexity we're diving into today. So for this deep dive, our mission is to journey through that scientific evolution. We're going to examine how the bedrock evidence for preventing neural tube defects, or NTDs, has expanded into nuanced research on everything from a child's general cognition and language skills to more specific conditions like Autism Spectrum Disorder, ASD, and Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder, ADHD.
All those connections.
We'll explore the critical dimensions of optimal dosages and timing, the different forms of folate available, and its absolutely crucial metabolic partnership with vitamin B12. This isn't just about what to take, it's about understanding why, how much, when, and what the latest science suggests about achieving what we're calling metabolic optimality for the best possible start in life.
Right. And to guide our exploration, we've compiled a comprehensive stack of sources for you. This includes the gold standard of scientific evidence, landmark randomized controlled trials, alongside systematic reviews, meta-analyses, and robust prospective cohort studies. Really solid stuff. We've drawn from leading health organizations like the CDC, the World Health Organization, and the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, ACOG, providing a truly robust foundation for our discussion today.
All right, let's unpack this. We simply have to begin with the cornerstone of folic acid's story. Its undeniable life-saving role in preventing neural tube defects. It stands as a true public health triumph, a medical miracle for countless families. Early explorations back in the mid-20th century started dropping hints, linking folate to better pregnancy outcomes. But it was in the late 80s and early 90s that the definitive, irrefutable evidence truly solidified.
That's absolutely right. The pivotal moment arrived with the 1991 British Medical Research Council, or MRC, randomized controlled trial, a real landmark. This study delivered unequivocal findings. For women who had already experienced an NTD-affected pregnancy, a tragically high-risk group taking 4.0 milligrams of folic acid daily reduced the risk of recurrence by a remarkable 70%.
70%, that's huge.
It's massive. Imagine that reduction. This was a monumental game changer. Subsequent trials swiftly extended this incredible benefit to the general population, showing similar protective effects even at a lower daily dose. This wasn't just a statistical blip, it was a clear, undeniable signal of profound benefit.
That's a staggering reduction. It truly makes you pause and think about the profound impact on families, the surgeries, the lifelong care that was averted. So if this nutrient is so transformative, why is folic acid so critical and why is it needed so incredibly early in pregnancy?
Well, it all comes down to its fundamental biological role, what scientists call one-carbon metabolism.
Okay, one-carbon metabolism. Sounds technical.
It does, but don't let the technical name scare you. Think of it as the body's essential logistics network for moving tiny molecular packages around. Very precise work. This network is absolutely vital for two major jobs. First, it synthesizes nucleotides, which are the basic building blocks of DNA, essentially, the blueprint of life itself.
Right, the actual building blocks.
Exactly. And second, it's crucial for DNA methylation, which is like the dimmer switch for our genes, deciding which ones are turned on or off at the right time. Gene expression control.
Got it. So building blocks and the instructions.
Precisely. Both of these processes are non-negotiable for rapid cell division, differentiation, and growth, especially in a rapidly developing embryo. Things are happening incredibly fast then.
So it's about providing both the raw materials and the precise instructions for those raw materials.
Got it. And that's exactly where the neural tube comes in, doesn't it?
Precisely. The neural tube is the embryonic precursor to the brain and spinal cord. Its formation, a process called neurulation. You can think of it as the brain and spinal cord literally zipping up or folding into shape.
Zipping up. Okay.
Yeah, it happens incredibly early in pregnancy, specifically between days 21 and 28 after conception.
Wow, day 21 to 28, that's really early. It is. To put that in perspective, this is often before a woman even knows she's pregnant, sometimes even before she misses her first period. During this narrow critical window, the neural plate folds and fuses to form a closed tube. Adequate folate is simply non-negotiable for the intense cellular proliferation and epigenetic regulation needed for this complex closure to occur correctly.
And if it doesn't close correctly during that tiny, narrow window, that's where the devastating consequences emerge, sadly.
Unfortunately, yes. Insufficient folate during this critical period can profoundly disrupt DNA synthesis and epigenetic programming. This leads to a failure of the neural tube to close, resulting in devastating birth defects. The two most prominent are spina bifida, which is an incomplete closure of the spinal cord, often leading to varying degrees of paralysis and other neurological issues, and anencephaly, the tragic absence of major portions of the brain and skull, which is incompatible with life. These are severe and often life-altering conditions, underscoring the urgency of prevention.
This timing issue, the fact that it all happens before a woman even knows she's pregnant, is absolutely central to understanding the pre-pregnant strategy, right? How did that thinking shift public health?
Absolutely. That incredibly early developmental window, combined with the often cited statistic that over 50% of pregnancies in the U.S. are unplanned.
Over half. Wow.
Yeah, over half. It created a unique and formidable public health challenge. Any strategy that waits until pregnancy confirmation is simply too late for NTD prevention. This biological reality necessitated a radical shift from a treatment-oriented model to a population-level, continuous prophylaxis approach. The only truly effective strategy is to ensure that all women of childbearing age maintain adequate folate levels continuously, essentially treating the entire demographic as pre-pregnant to protect against NTDs in both planned and unplanned pregnancies. It's a proactive population-wide safety net.
That's a powerful public health philosophy, and it led to something pretty rare in health policy, a truly global consensus.
It truly is rare to see such widespread agreement. Based on this overwhelming, undeniable evidence, a strong and remarkably consistent global consensus emerged. Major health and medical organizations worldwide, including the CDC, WHO, ACOG, and the U.S. Public Health Service, all issued clear, harmonized guidelines. These recommendations are among the most robust and widely accepted in all of preventive health.
So for our listener, what are those universal recommendations for the standard risk population, the everyday women capable of becoming pregnant?
Okay, so for women in the general population who are capable of becoming pregnant, the universal recommendation is a daily supplement containing 0.4 to 0.8 milligrams. That's 400 to 800 micrograms of folic acid.
400 to 800 micrograms, got it.
Right. The U.S. Preventive Services Task Force, for instance, has assigned this a grade A recommendation, which means there's high certainty of substantial net benefit. It's really strong backing. The critical period for starting this supplementation is at least 1 month before conception, and it should continue through the first trimester, roughly the first 12 weeks of pregnancy. This ensures that crucial neurulation period is covered.
At least a month before. Okay. And what about women who are identified as high risk? What's the guidance there?
For high-risk women, the recommendation is significantly higher, 4.0 to 5.0 milligrams or 4,000 to 5,000 micrograms daily. That's quite a jump.
Yeah, 10 times higher.
Exactly. This category specifically includes women with a personal or family history of an NTD, those with a prior NTD-affected pregnancy, or those with certain medical conditions like diabetes, obesity, or malabsorption disorders, or who are on specific medications such as valproic acid, which is known to interfere with folate metabolism. This higher dose should also be initiated at least 1 month, and often up to 3 months, before attempting to conceive and continued through the first 12 weeks of gestation.
It's remarkable how consistent these guidelines are across so many different organizations, both nationally and internationally. Our sources highlight this rare global agreement, which really underscores the strength of the evidence.
Absolutely. This level of consensus is a testament to the clarity and power of the initial research findings. But knowing that relying solely on individual supplementation might miss a significant portion of the population, public health authorities took an additional powerful step.
And that step was mandatory fortification of foods, which really amplified the public health impact. How did that work?
Indeed. 1998, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, mandated that enriched cereal grain products, things like flour, bread, pasta, rice, and many breakfast cereals, be fortified with folic acid. The goal was clever: to increase the average daily intake for women of childbearing age by approximately 100 micrograms, thereby raising the baseline folate status across the entire population as a safety net, even for those unaware they needed it or not taking supplements.
It's a safety net approach. And the results were impressive, a really quantifiable success, weren't they?
They were. Since the implementation of mandatory fortification, NTD rates in the U.S. have declined by an estimated 20–30%.
20 to 30%, that's saving lives.
Absolutely, preventing approximately 1,300 NTDs annually. It's a huge public health win. In 2016, the FDA even extended this policy to corn masa flour, a staple in many Hispanic communities, specifically to address persistent disparities in folate intake and NTD rates within those populations, trying to reach everyone.
But even with that impressive success, an observed reduction of 20–30% still falls short of the projected 50–70% reduction we might expect if all women hit the recommended target. What are the limitations? Why the gap?
Right, that's a really important question. This gap points to persistent disparities and the inherent limitations of any single public health strategy. Fortification, while crucial, isn't a silver bullet. It often isn't enough on its own to raise an individual's intake to the optimal level, especially for those with poor dietary habits or who don't regularly consume fortified products.
Makes sense.
For example, research indicates that certain groups, particularly Hispanic Latino women, continue to have lower blood folate levels and a higher risk of NTD-affected pregnancies in the post-fortification era. This is possibly due to dietary patterns that rely on non-fortified staples like corn masa before 2016, or perhaps other socioeconomic factors play a role. This highlights that a multi-pronged approach combining fortification, targeted supplementation, and culturally sensitive education is absolutely essential to reach maximum prevention potential. You need all three.
The story of folic acid could have ended there, a triumphant public health success for preventing NTDs. But as so often happens in science, answering one big question only leads to many more. What else, scientists wondered, was this vital nutrient doing for the developing baby? And that's where our deep dive truly begins to explore the frontier of its impact, moving beyond the neural tube.
Exactly. That's where the scientific landscape truly broadens, revealing a more intricate understanding. The same fundamental biochemical processes that folic acid supports for neural tube closure, namely nucleotide synthesis for building blocks and DNA methylation for genetic dimmer switches, aren't just one-off events.
Right, not just for that early window.
No, they're also absolutely essential for the continuous, lifelong processes of neurogenesis, making new brain cells, neuronal migration, getting them to the right place, synaptogenesis, forming connections, and myelination, insulating nerve fibers, throughout the entirety of brain development.
So we're talking about the fundamental building blocks and regulatory switches that are critical for brain development, not just in the first month, but continually throughout pregnancy and even beyond.
Exactly. It's an ongoing construction project, essentially. This broader biochemical impact has led researchers to shift their focus from looking at gross structural anomalies like spina bifida to investigating more subtle and prolonged neurodevelopmental outcomes that can affect a child's entire life.
And what are they finding in terms of cognitive, language, and behavioral outcomes? Is there a positive association there too?
There is, and the evidence is quite consistently positive, actually. A comprehensive 2021 panoramic review, which synthesized a vast amount of data from numerous studies, concluded that prenatal folic acid supplementation has a clear positive impact on a wide range of outcomes. This includes improved intellectual development and a reduced risk of behavioral and language problems in offspring. Pretty broad benefits.
Can you give us some specific examples of what those improvements look like for children?
Certainly. Studies have linked adequate supplementation to higher scores in verbal, motor, and verbal executive function domains in children aged 4 to 6 years old. To give you a specific case, a prospective study in Greece found that mothers who took a high dose of folic acid, 5 milligrams per day, in early pregnancy had children with enhanced vocabulary, communication skills, and verbal comprehension at 18 months of age.
5 milligrams, that's the high dose again. Interesting.
It is. And another systematic review highlighted that 15 of 22 included studies showed beneficial effects on various neurodevelopmental outcomes, including reduced emotional and behavioral problems. So it's not just one study, it's a pattern emerging across the literature.
That's truly fascinating. Is there a biological reason we might expect these broader, long-lasting benefits, something we can point to?
There's strong biological plausibility, yes. For instance, a study within the large generation R cohort found that low maternal folate levels in early pregnancy were associated with smaller total brain volume in school-aged children.
Smaller brain volume.
Yes, suggesting that insufficient folate during critical periods of neurogenesis, the formation of new brain cells, can have lasting, measurable effects on the brain's physical architecture. And that, in turn, can certainly impact cognitive performance and potential throughout life. Structure affects function.
So these findings really start to imply that supplementation might be beneficial for longer than just the first trimester if brain development is such a continuous, dynamic process.
Precisely. It expands the conversation significantly. But here's where the plot thickens, quite a bit actually. It reveals a crucial insight that challenges our initial assumptions. Scientists are observing what they call a U-shaped curve when it comes to folic acid in autism spectrum disorder,
Right.
or ASD.
A U-shaped curve. Okay, like a graph that goes down, then up again.
Exactly. Think of it like this. Just as too little can be problematic, so too can too much. There's an optimal zone.
A U-shaped curve, so there's a sweet spot, and straying too far in either direction might carry risks. Let's break that down. What's the evidence for the protective effect of adequate supplementation first? The good part of the U.
That's exactly the right way to think about it. Let's start with the protective effect of adequate supplementation, because that evidence is robust and encouraging. A major 2022 meta-analysis pooling data from 10 studies and nearly 10,000 AD cases found that maternal folic acid supplementation during early pregnancy was associated with a statistically significant 43% lower odds of offspring developing ASD.
43% lower odds. That's substantial.
It is. This is a very strong, consistent signal across a large body of research. The timing and dosage are critical here, with the protective effect being strongest periconceptually and in early pregnancy. Studies like the CHARGE study specifically found that a daily intake of at least 400–600 micrograms from all sources, so supplements plus food, was linked to a reduced risk of ASD.
Okay, so 400–600 mics seems like a good target for ASD prevention too. But where does the other side of the U-shaped curve come in? What's the paradox of excessive folate and how much is too much?
Well, the paradox emerges from some counterintuitive findings. The most prominent human study on this, from the Johns Hopkins Boston birth cohort, found that very high maternal plasma folate levels, specifically above 59 nanomoles per liter, measured shortly after delivery, were associated with a doubled risk of ASD.
Doubled risk. Okay, that definitely catches your attention, especially after hearing about the protective effects. And it suggests we can't just say more is better for this nutrient.
It does, and it's a critical point of nuance.
Why?
This concern isn't isolated. Animal models have lent support to this idea. Mouse studies showed that both maternal folate deficiency and maternal folate excess caused comparable neurodevelopmental changes, including delayed cortical neurogenesis and subsequent behavioral abnormalities in the offspring. Both extremes were bad.
Both extremes. So that provides biological plausibility for the U-shape we're observing in humans.
Exactly.
So the U-shaped dose-response curve suggests there's a delicate sweet spot, just like Goldilocks, not too little, not too much, but just right.
That's a great analogy. The hypothesis is that optimal neurodevelopment occurs within a specific, carefully calibrated range of folate availability. Folate is required for exquisitely balanced biological mechanisms, DNA synthesis for cell proliferation and DNA methylation for epigenetic programming. These need to be just right. It's plausible that both too little folate, which hinders vital cell division, and too much folate, which could disrupt that delicate balance of epigenetic marks, might interfere with the precise orchestration of fetal brain development. It's a testament to the body's intricate biochemistry.
Wow. And if that wasn't complex enough, our sources point to a critical interaction with vitamin B12. What's the deeper complexity there, particularly from that Johns Hopkins study?
This is perhaps one of the most striking and, frankly, important findings, revealing how interconnected our nutrient systems really are. The same Johns Hopkins study that found a doubled ASD risk with very high folate also found that very high maternal B12 levels alone tripled the ASD risk.
High B12 alone tripled the risk. That's surprising too.
It is. But the most astounding finding was when they looked at both together. If both folate and B12 were extremely high, the risk of a child developing ASD increased by an astounding 17.6-fold.
17.6-fold. That's an absolutely incredible jump in risk. What on earth does that suggest to researchers?
Well, it points very strongly to what researchers are calling the imbalance hypothesis. It suggests that a severe imbalance in the one-carbon metabolic pathway, rather than simply a high level of a single nutrient, might be the true pathological driver. Imagine folate and B12 are like two gears in a complex machine, needing to spin in perfect sync. If you have way too much folate, and maybe way too much B12 too, but they're out of sync, it's like jamming the gears.
So the ratio or balance is key, not just the absolute amounts.
That seems to be the critical insight here. This severe imbalance could jam the entire system, especially for the delicate, finely tuned processes of fetal brain development. It underscores that we absolutely cannot look at these nutrients in isolation. Their synergy, or lack thereof, is key.
Okay, that's a major complexity to keep in mind. Shifting gears slightly, what about ADHD? Are there emerging links there too, or is it too early to tell?
Yes, research into the connection between maternal folic acid supplementation and ADHD is more nascent, definitely newer than the ASD research, but a consistent protective signal is certainly beginning to emerge. A recent 2023 meta-analysis, which synthesized data from 6 studies encompassing nearly 30,000 participants, found that maternal folic acid supplementation was associated with a statistically significant 14% reduction in the odds of offspring being diagnosed with ADHD.
14%. Okay, smaller than the ASD finding, but still significant.
Right. It suggests a meaningful, albeit smaller, protective effect compared to ASD, but it's definitely there in the data.
So another protective signal. Are there other pieces of evidence that corroborate this finding, maybe from children who already have ADHD?
Absolutely. From a different angle, studies have observed that children diagnosed with ADHD tend to have significantly lower plasma levels of folate compared to their typically developing peers. Furthermore, a case control study found that mothers of children with ADHD were significantly less likely to have used preconception folic acid supplements compared to mothers of control children. These lines of evidence, while observational, all point in a consistent direction.
Okay, multiple lines of evidence pointing towards protection. But I'm guessing, given our discussion on ASD, there's a nuance here too, perhaps another U-shaped curve for ADHD.
You're quick to pick up on the pattern. And you're right. Indeed, a study from the INMA project in Spain reported that both low paraconceptional use less than 400 micrograms per day and high use 1,000 micrograms per day or more of folic acid were associated with higher risks of attentional dysfunction in children at ages 4 to 5.
So less than 400 and 1,000 or more, both linked to attention problems.
Exactly. This effect was particularly pronounced in boys in that study. So for ADHD, the evidence also strongly suggests an optimal window, with potential harm at both extremes of intake. That U-shape seems to be a recurring theme.
It's abundantly clear now that this new data fundamentally changes the game. It's not just about taking any folic acid, but getting the right amount at the right time. This moves us beyond a simple take a vitamin message. Let's dive into what the science says about truly optimizing dosage and timing.
This is a critical area because it directly impacts clinical recommendations and how we advise individuals. While the recommendation for NTD prevention is remarkably straightforward, the optimal application of folic acid for these broader neurodevelopmental outcomes demands careful consideration of both when to start and stop and precisely how much to take.
So the paraconceptional window for NTDs remains the absolute non-negotiable, unwavering standard, correct? That message hasn't changed.
Unequivocally, that message is rock solid. The evidence is crystal clear that the most critical window for NTD prevention is the periconceptional period, starting at least 1 month prior to conception and continuing through the first 12 weeks of gestation. This timing directly corresponds to the period of neural tube formation and closure. Missing that window carries the greatest risk for those specific defects.
But for brain development more broadly, as you said, it's not just the first trimester. The brain continues to grow and develop at an astonishing rate throughout pregnancy.
No, absolutely not. Just the first trimester. Fetal brain development is a protracted, incredibly dynamic process that continues throughout all 3 trimesters and well into the postnatal period. The second and third trimesters, for example, involve intensive myelination, that insulation of nerve fibers for faster signal transmission, and rapid, significant brain growth. This naturally led researchers to question whether supplementation beyond the first trimester offers additional ongoing benefits for these later developmental stages.
Makes sense to ask. And what did trials like the FAST-TT trial find about continuing supplementation?
The folic acid supplementation in the second and third trimesters, or FAST-TT, randomized trial, provided key insights here. It demonstrated that women who continued a 400 microgram per day folic acid supplement from week 14 of gestation until delivery had children with better cognitive performance at ages 3 and 7, compared to those who took a placebo during that same period.
Better cognitive performance later on. That's compelling.
It is. Further analysis even suggested sex-specific improvements, particularly in verbal comprehension for girls. This is pretty strong evidence for continued benefits beyond that first trimester focus for NTDs.
So it seems like there are real benefits to continuing supplementation, at least at the standard dose, but you mentioned a dilemma earlier concerning potential downsides of high intake in late gestation. Where does that tension lie?
That's precisely the tension scientists and clinicians are grappling with. While continued benefits for ongoing brain development are strongly suggested by FAST-T and other studies, concerns have been raised about the potential downsides of prolonged high intake. This relates particularly to the accumulation of something called unmetabolized folic acid, or UMFA, which some studies have tentatively linked to increased risk of childhood allergies and insulin resistance later on. We'll get into UMFA more soon.
Okay.
But it suggests a need for a carefully considered, potentially modulated dose if supplementation continues throughout pregnancy. We want the benefits without inadvertently introducing new risks. It's a balancing act.
This brings us squarely to the dose-response conundrum. Standard versus high dose. What's the current thinking about the standard dose, 400, 800 micrograms for the general population?
Okay, the standard dose of 400, 800 micrograms per day remains the firmly established standard of care for NTD prevention in the general population. Decades of rigorous research confirm its effectiveness and safety for that purpose. Moreover, this range appears to align with the optimal intake for reducing the risk of other neurodevelopmental disorders, like ASD, where meta-analyses show no clear additional benefit from higher doses. It seems to hit that sweet spot we talked about for multiple outcomes.
So the standard dose seems to be the sweet spot for many things. What about the high dose 1,000 micrograms or 1 milligram or even the 4 to 5 milligrams per day? When is that truly indicated and when is it controversial?
Right. A daily dose of 4,000 to 5,000 micrograms, 4 to 5 milligrams, is strongly recommended only for high-risk women for recurrent NTD prevention. The evidence for this specific indication is robust and clear. No question there. However, for the general population or for other outcomes, using such high doses is controversial. Several observational studies have associated maternal intake of 1,000 micrograms per day or more with adverse neurodevelopmental outcomes, including psychomotor delay, poorer verbal function, and deficits in attentional function in children.
So potential downsides seen in observational studies above 1,000 mics.
Yes. And one study from Greece even found that doses higher than 5 milligrams per day offered no additional benefit for NTD prevention, suggesting a plateau effect and no reason for even higher doses, even in high-risk groups.
That sounds like a clear warning against general high-dose use, but I recall our sources mentioning some recent, perhaps conflicting data, specifically about high doses, something called the MONAID study. What does that new information tell us?
Ah, yes, this is where the nuance is critical, and it highlights the ongoing nature of scientific inquiry. A very recent 2025 prospective observational study from the MONAID cohort provided some contrasting data. It's important because it was prospective. It found that even very high doses of folic acid, greater than 4.0 milligrams per day taken during the first trimester, were associated with significantly improved verbal abilities and adaptive behavior in children at age 6, with no evidence of negative effects compared to lower doses in that cohort.
So improved outcomes with very high doses in the first trimester in that study. That seems to contradict the other observational findings linking high doses to problems.
It does seem to challenge some of the earlier observational data, yes. It highlights the ongoing debate and suggests that perhaps the timing of the high dose matters immensely. Maybe first trimester high dose is different from later high dose. Or perhaps the specific population studied influences the outcome. It's not a settled issue.
So it's not a settled issue for high doses in the general population, especially beyond the first trimester. What does this conflicting evidence imply for the future, perhaps for how supplementation strategies might evolve?
It suggests the possibility of a more dynamic supplementation strategy in the future. For example, a high-risk woman might use a 4 to 5 milligram dose during the critical periconceptional window for NTD prevention, then potentially step down to a standard maintenance dose, like 400 to 800 milligram, for the remainder of the pregnancy.
Tailoring the dose over time.
Potentially. This could support ongoing brain development while minimizing risks associated with prolonged high-dose exposure later on. For an average-risk woman, a consistent standard dose of 400-800 micrograms throughout pregnancy may prove to be the most prudent and beneficial approach based on current evidence. This is definitely a significant area for future, carefully designed research. We need more clarity.
You also mentioned unmetabolized folic acid, or UMFA, earlier as a potential concern with high doses. What exactly is that, and why are scientists keeping an eye on it?
Right, UMFA. It's a key mechanistic concern related to high-dose supplementation. Remember, folic acid is synthetic and requires enzymatic conversion by an enzyme called dihydrofolate reductase, or DHFR, into its biologically active forms. This enzyme has a limited capacity, like a turnstile that can only let so many people through at once. When intake of folic acid is high, say, from a combination of high-dose supplements and a diet rich in fortified foods, this conversion pathway can become saturated.
The enzyme gets overwhelmed.
Exactly. The excess unconverted folic acid then essentially spills over and enters the bloodstream, circulating as UMFA.
So it's essentially a form of folate that's just floating around, not being actively used by the body in the same way.
Basically, yes.
Hmm.
And while the presence of some UMFA is actually quite common in populations with mandatory food fortification, and the CDC's official position is that, to date, no confirmed health risks have been directly attributed to it.
No confirmed risks yet.
Not confirmed causally, but it is an area of very active and evolving research. Several observational studies have raised concerns, tentatively linking UMFA, especially when detected in late gestation, to increased risks of childhood allergies, metabolic issues like insulin resistance, and as we touched on, potentially even ASD.
That's a lot of potential risks to consider. Is the evidence for these links strong enough to cause alarm yet, or is it still preliminary?
It's important to emphasize that current evidence is largely correlational. We see an association, but we can't yet definitively say UMFA causes these issues. Correlation isn't causation, as they say. Further rigorous investigation is needed to establish causality.
Got it. Associations, not proven cause and effect.
However, there's also a reassuring caveat to mention. A study focusing on a high-risk population children of women with epilepsy, taking anti-seizure medication and high-dose folic acid, found no association between maternal UMFA concentrations during pregnancy and the risk of autistic traits or language impairment in their children. This suggests that the effects of UMFA, if they exist, may differ between populations or perhaps depend on other metabolic factors. It's complex. Nonetheless, the potential implications of UMFA remain a key scientific question that tempers enthusiasm for indiscriminate, very high-dose folic acid supplementation throughout pregnancy. It warrants caution.
This all brings us to another fascinating layer of complexity. Not just how much and when, but what kind of folate and how it interacts with other vital nutrients. Let's delve into this idea of biochemical individuality.
This is indeed a fascinating area that truly highlights the personalized nature of nutrition. While public health recommendations are necessarily broad, we're learning that individual genetic variations and the specific chemical form of folate can profoundly influence how effectively it's utilized by the body. One size might not fit all perfectly.
So it's about the folic acid versus L-methylfolate or 5-MTHF, debate synthetic versus active forms. Can you break down the core arguments for each? Let's start with good old folic acid.
Certainly. Folic acid is the synthetic, fully oxidized form of folate that isn't found naturally in food. Its big advantages are its high stability. It lasts well in supplements and fortified foods, and excellent bioavailability, almost 100% from supplements and around 85% from fortified foods, which is much higher than natural food folates. But here's the crucial point. Folic acid is the only form that has been rigorously tested in large-scale randomized controlled trials and proven to prevent NTDs. That's the bedrock evidence. This robust, high-quality evidence is precisely why major public health bodies like the CDC and ACOG continue to exclusively recommend it for NTD prevention. Their position is grounded in the certainty of a proven, successful public health intervention that has saved countless lives.
Okay, proven track record for NTD prevention is the key for folic acid. And what about L-methylfolate or 5-MTHF? What's the argument for that?
L-methylfolate, often abbreviated as 5-MTHF, is the naturally occurring, myologically active form of folate. It's the primary form circulating in your blood and is directly used by your cells in metabolic reactions without needing conversion first. As a supplement, its main proposed advantage is that it bypasses the complex, multi-step enzymatic conversion process that synthetic folic acid must undergo to become active. It doesn't rely on the efficiency of enzymes like DHFR and, importantly, MTHFR, which can vary between individuals due to genetics. Studies have shown 5-MTHF supplementation is at least as effective, and in some cases maybe even more effective than folic acid at increasing blood folate concentrations. It gets the levels up.
Okay, so it bypasses potential bottlenecks and raises blood levels effectively. It sounds like a classic tension. The certainty of proven population-level efficacy for folic acid versus the biochemical logic of a more direct active form like 5-MTHF.
That's a perfect way to frame it. The biochemical argument for 5-MTHF is strong. It makes logical sense. However, it currently lacks the large-scale clinical trial evidence directly demonstrating its efficacy in preventing NTDs specifically. That's the missing piece. And conducting such a trial today would be ethically complex, maybe impossible, as it would require randomizing participants to a group that doesn't receive the proven standard of care, which is folic acid.
Right, you can't ethically withhold something proven to work.
Exactly. So until direct, high-quality evidence for 5-MTHF's efficacy in NTD primary prevention is established, folic acid will likely remain the recommended standard for public health, simply because of the irrefutable evidence base we have for it preventing those specific severe defects.
This debate often brings up the MTHFR gene polymorphism. What exactly is that, and how does it factor into this discussion about folic acid versus 5-MTHF?
Right, MTHFR. The MTHFR enzyme, its full name is methylene tetrahydrofolate reductase, is critical for the final step of converting folate into its active 5-MTHF form inside our cells. A significant portion of the global population, estimates range from 40 to 60%, carries at least one copy of a common variant in this gene, like the one known as C677T. These variants lead to a less efficient MTHFR enzyme, reducing its activity by anywhere from 30 to 70%, depending on whether you have one or two copies.
Okay, so a lot of people have a potentially slower enzyme. The hypothesis then is that individuals with these variants might struggle to convert synthetic folic acid efficiently, and the 5-MTHF would be a better choice for them.
That's the core hypothesis driving much of the interest in 5-MTHF, yes. Proponents argue that supplementing directly with the active form bypasses this genetic bottleneck, potentially ensuring adequate folate status, regardless of an individual's MTHFR genotype. Makes sense on paper. However, the CDC's official position, based on a comprehensive review of the evidence, counters this specific argument regarding NTD prevention. They state that individuals with MTHFR gene variants can still process all forms of folate, including synthetic folic acid.
They can still process it, just maybe slower.
Exactly. While those with the MTHFR 677PT genotype, two copies of the variant, might have slightly lower average blood folate levels, the standard recommended intake of 400 micrograms of folic acid daily is considered sufficient to raise blood folate to a protective range in all genotype groups, including those with TT. The CDC concludes that total folic acid intake is a more important determinant of blood folate status for NTD prevention than MTHFR genotype alone. Getting enough overall is what matters most for that outcome.
That's a really important clarification from the CDC and helps cut through some of the noise you hear about MTHFR testing and specific supplements. Now, let's talk about the indispensable partner in all this, the folate vitamin B12 metabolic axis. How are these two nutrients so intertwined?
Their metabolism is inextricably linked. They are truly partners in a biological dance. You really can't talk about one without the other. The critical intersection occurs at the enzyme methionine synthase. This enzyme absolutely requires vitamin B12 or cobalamin as an essential cofactor to do its job. B12 helps transfer a methyl group from 5-MTHF, the active folate, to homocysteine. This reaction regenerates methionine, essential amino acid, and also frees up tetrahydrofolate, which can then be used for other folate-dependent reactions like DNA synthesis. Without adequate B12, this entire crucial cycle can slow down or even halt, causing a backlog of 5-MTHF and potentially impacting countless cellular processes.
So B12 is needed to keep the folate cycle turning over properly. And there's a long recognized concern about high folic acid intake potentially masking a B12 deficiency, isn't there? What does that mean for someone's health?
Yes, that's the classic masking effect. And it's been a concern for decades, especially since fortification started. Both folate and B12 deficiencies can cause megaloblastic anemia, a type of anemia where red blood cells become unusually large. High doses of folic acid can provide enough substrate to overcome the block in red blood cell production, thereby correcting the anemia, even if an underlying B12 deficiency is the real root cause. While the anemia resolves, which seems like a good thing, the potentially irreversible neurological damage caused by the B12 deficiency can continue to progress silently, undetected. That's the danger.
So the blood looks better, but the nerve damage continues.
Precisely. While modern B12 testing mitigates this risk somewhat in clinical settings, it remains a valid concern at a population level where B12 status isn't routinely screened in all individuals taking high amounts of folic acid, either through supplements or fortified foods.
But recent research has gone even further, suggesting a more active detriment from the imbalance, not just masking. This is the imbalance hypothesis, or folate trap we discussed earlier with ASD, correct? Can you elaborate on why this combination of high folate, low B12 is so concerning?
Exactly. More recent and profoundly concerning research suggests that a metabolic state of high folate combined with low B12 is itself actively detrimental, particularly to the developing fetal brain. It's not just hiding the B12 problem, the combination itself might be harmful. This folate trap occurs because when B12 is low, the methionine synthase enzyme slows down, trapping folate in the 5-MTHF form, which can be easily used for other essential reactions like making DNA building blocks. This can severely impair the function of the entire one-carbon metabolism pathway. Animal studies have vividly demonstrated that this specific nutritional imbalance, high folate, low B12, can lead to altered gene expression in the fetal brain, structural brain abnormalities, and subsequent cognitive and behavioral issues in offspring. It's not just a theoretical risk, we see it play out in the lab.
And are we seeing evidence of this specific imbalance causing problems in humans as well?
Human observational studies have certainly linked this imbalance, high maternal folate and low B12 status, to adverse outcomes. These include an increased risk for small for gestational age infants and even insulin resistance in the offspring, suggesting potential long-term metabolic health implications. This evidence has a crucial implication for our understanding of prenatal nutrition. Folic acid should not be considered a standalone nutrient. Its safety and efficacy are conditional upon adequate B12 status. They are truly two sides of the same metabolic coin.
So, public health strategies and individual advice really need to consider B12 too, especially for vulnerable populations who might be at higher risk for B12 deficiency.
Absolutely. Aggressively promoting folic acid through fortification and supplementation, without a parallel emphasis on ensuring B12 adequacy, could inadvertently create this high-risk metabolic state in vulnerable subpopulations. Think vegetarians and vegans who consume little to no dietary B12, or individuals with malabsorptive disorders like Crohn's disease, celiac disease, or pernicious anemia, or those who've had certain types of weight loss surgery. They're all at higher risk for B12 deficiency. This makes the assessment of B12 status, or at least ensuring adequate B12 intake through diet or supplementation, a critical component of comprehensive periconceptional care. Most good prenatal vitamins now contain both, which is important. It's a holistic approach that's required.
We've covered a tremendous amount of ground today, wow. From the well-established benefits for NTDs to these emerging complexities around dose, timing, ASD, ADHD, and this fascinating interplay with B12. So as we bring it all together, what does all this mean for you, our listener, and what are the big questions scientists are still trying to answer?
It's been quite a journey, hasn't it? It really highlights how much our understanding of this seemingly simple nutrient has grown from a straightforward solution to a complex symphony of biochemical interactions. The unwavering cornerstone remains. The recommendation for 400-800 micrograms of folic acid daily for NTD prevention is robust, consistent, and conclusive. It's a non-negotiable foundational part of prenatal care, and that message is clearer than ever. Don't forget the basics.
So that basic life-saving recommendation for NTDs is still rock solid, absolutely fundamental, but beyond that, it gets incredibly nuanced, doesn't it?
Precisely. Beyond NTDs, there's strong suggestive evidence of protective effects for general cognition, language development, and reducing risk for both ASD and ADHD. However, we must underscore that this relationship is often nonlinear. The emerging U-shaped or J-shaped risk curves for ASD and ADHD tell us that both deficiency and significant excess may be detrimental. This emphasizes a critical shift in thinking from simply preventing deficiency to achieving an optimal range of intake. That Goldilocks zone seems really important for neurodevelopment.
Finding that sweet spot, and it all seems to hinge on what you called optimal metabolic state, considering biochemical individuality with things like MTHFR and that absolutely critical interplay with B12. That's one of the big aha moments from today, for sure.
Exactly. The efficacy and even safety of folic acid seem to be profoundly modulated by these factors. Biochemical individuality, genetics, though maybe less critical than intake for NTDs, and most importantly, by the delicate balance with vitamin B12. The data increasingly suggests that the ratio imbalance between folate and B12 may be even more critical for fetal neurodevelopment than absolute levels of either nutrient alone. It's a delicate dance, and both partners need to be present and in sync for the best performance.
So, with all this intricate science in mind, what are the key implications for clinical practice and public health messaging that our listeners should take away? What's the practical advice?
Okay, for clinical practice, number one is to reinforce the foundational guidance. Clinicians must continue to strongly recommend 400-800 micrograms of folic acid daily for all women of childbearing age, and 4 or 5 milligrams daily for high-risk NTD patients initiated preconception. That's paramount. Beyond that, promoting a holistic view of folate intake is vital. Clinicians should engage in dialogue about the total daily folate intake from all sources, supplements, fortified foods, and natural foods to help patients understand their overall intake and avoid potential unintended excess.
So, looking at the whole picture, not just the supplement dose, and given that crucial B12 interaction, I imagine that's a big part of the conversation too. We can't talk about folate without B12 anymore.
Critically so. Clinicians absolutely should assess and address B12 status, especially for those at higher risk for deficiency, like vegetarians, vegans, or individuals with malabsorptive disorders. Recommending a prenatal vitamin that contains both folic acid and adequate vitamin B12 is a prudent universal strategy for comprehensive care. It covers both bases. When it comes to the folic acid versus 5-MTHF discussion, clinicians should acknowledge the biochemical rationale for 5-MTHF, but clearly state that synthetic folic acid has the robust, trial-based evidence for NTD prevention and remains the standard of care recommended by all major medical bodies for that purpose. The evidence for NTD prevention, for now, is clearly with folic acid.
Okay, stick with the proven standard for NTDs, ensure B12 is adequate, and consider total intake. What about public health policy? How should that evolve to incorporate these nuanced insights?
Public health policy should absolutely maintain and monitor fortification programs as they remain highly effective safety nets, but also ensure that benefits are realized without pushing large segments of the population into potentially excessive intake ranges. Ongoing monitoring is key. Additionally, public health messaging needs to be refined. Campaigns should evolve beyond the simple message of take folic acid to perhaps incorporate the concept of an optimal range, the importance of considering all dietary sources, and the essential partnership with vitamin B12. It's a more complex message, but maybe necessary now. And finally, continued targeted outreach and education are needed to address persistent health disparities in folate status and NTD rates among certain ethnic and socioeconomic groups who might still be missed by current strategies. Equity remains a goal.
It's clear there are still many unanswered questions and fascinating directions for future research. What are the top priorities for scientists right now? Where do we need more answers?
Absolutely, there are several key areas. The most pressing need, which is ethically challenging but scientifically crucial, is for large-scale, ethically designed, randomized controlled trials directly comparing folic acid versus L-methylfolate, or MTHF, for the primary prevention of NTDs. While complex, innovative trial designs might eventually address this gap, but it's a big one. We also desperately need further research to precisely define the dose-response curves for non-NTD neurodevelopmental outcomes like ASD and ADHD, identifying the true risk threshold for excess folate, and clarifying the benefits versus risks of continuing supplementation beyond the first trimester and at what dose.
Nail down those optimal ranges and timings. And that complex folate B12 axis needs even more attention too, I'd imagine, especially with that astonishing 17.6-fold risk increase you mentioned.
Undeniably. Urgent investigation is needed into the complex and sometimes contradictory findings regarding that interaction, particularly the increased ASD risk observed with high levels of both vitamins. What is going on there? Research is needed on ideal folate to B12 ratios in supplements to prevent that potential metabolic imbalance. Are current prenatal formulations optimal? We don't fully know. And on a more fundamental level, continued basic science and translational research are crucial to understand the precise epigenetic and metabolic mechanisms through which both folate deficiency and excess truly impact fetal neurodevelopment. It's about understanding the how behind the what we observe.
We've journeyed through folic acid's incredible story today, from a foundational public health triumph that reshaped prenatal care to a nutrient whose subtle complexities are still being unraveled. It truly shows us how intricately linked our biochemistry is to lifelong health.
It's a powerful reminder, isn't it, that even our most established health wisdom, like take your vitamins, can hold hidden layers of complexity, inviting us to dig deeper and continually refine our understanding as science progresses.
Indeed, it truly makes you pause and think. As we learn more, it seems the simple act of taking a vitamin is revealing itself to be a symphony of biological precision. So, what are the three big, potentially surprising takeaways from today? First, the miracle of folic acid isn't just about preventing birth defects, it's about shaping a child's brain from conception onward, influencing cognition and behavior. Second, more isn't always better, in fact. Sometimes it might be worse, with potential U-shaped risks for neurodevelopment at very high intakes. And third, folic acid never works alone. Its partner, B12, is just as critical, and their delicate balance might be the real key to unlocking optimal benefits. What other simple health advice might hold similar hidden layers of complexity waiting for us to uncover? That's a thought to mull over until our next deep dive.